I'm not going to lie, you're slacking. You're slacking on starting that business you've been holding off on. It's just living in your head. And if you don't act now, that idea is going to leave, or maybe someone's going to take that idea. And there's a tool that I personally use, and that is Shopify. You don't need to be a web designer. You can just start moving, zooming in, adding the text you need, adding pictures you need. And Shopify has so many templates you can use from. Get it out of your head and onto a website with Shopify. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sell. They make it easy to manage growing your business. They help with details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, allowing you to focus on all the important stuff like growing your business. With Shopify, your first sale is closer than you think. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/sonoro, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/sonoro to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/sonoro.
Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda. It's time to take an adventure with rugged capability and commanding style. Check out the Honda Ridgeline, Pilot, or CRV. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 3.99% APR on a 2025 Pilot, a 1.99% APR on a 2025 Ridgeline, or a 2.99% APR on a 2025 CRV.
See dealer for financing details.
What I'm about to tell you happened in Ciudad Juarez, back in the 90s. It's not my story, but my father's, though I've heard it so many times that I feel it as my own. My father had the habit of listening to the radio in his car, especially at night when he got off work. There was a program on an AM station, one of those small ones that hardly anyone tunes into, where people would call to request old songs. Most were boleros, or rancheras that brought back memories of other times. The program was produced by a friend of his, so my father listened to it often. One night while driving, he heard something that left him thinking. A woman called the station. Her voice was muted, low, as if she were very tired or very sad. She requested a song that they couldn't find in the studio. They apologized and asked if she wanted to request another. But the woman didn't respond. She just remained silent for a few seconds, and then hung up. They didn't give it much importance. It was normal for people to call and change their minds or simply get nervous on air. But the next day, my father tuned into the program again, and almost at the same time, the call from the same woman came in, who requested only the same song. This time the team had it prepared, and they played it on air. It was Reloj by Trio Los Panchos. As the song began to play, the host and his friend in production felt a chill. Thank you. They had barely played the first chords when on the line they heard a thank you. Although they were sure they had hung up, it was a whisper, barely perceptible, as if it were in the song. It was enough for it to be etched in their memory. The program continued its course. The song ended. More calls came in with other requests, and everything seemed normal. Until, almost at the end of the program, they received one more call. It was a man. He asked if the woman who had requested the song from Los Panchos had given her name. The host fell silent for a moment, trying to remember. She hadn't. He asked the producer if he had her name, or at least the number from which she had called. Nothing. There was no record. Then the man on the line said something that left everyone in the studio frozen. It's just that voice sounded exactly like my sister's, Tita. The host said nothing, waiting for him to continue. My sister passed away last Saturday. Last Saturday. The man explained with a strange tone, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was saying. And Reloj was our song. She used to sing it to me when we were children. Before going to sleep, the host tried to respond, but didn't know what to say. He only managed to ask on air, to the woman, if she was listening, to call back, to say her name, but they never received another call from her. The studio fell silent after hanging up. No one knew how to explain what had happened. When my father asked his friend, the producer, if it had all been set up, if it was a montage to make the program more interesting, he swore it wasn't, that the call was real. He maintained that version until his death in 2018. And to this day, my father still believes that that night, Tita, the woman, called from beyond, just to say goodbye to her brother. It's impossible for a story that has to do with radio not to affect us in a special way. Don't you think so, community? It's time to immerse ourselves in darkness. Let's delve into a world of stories that defy logic. Tales full of mystery, inexplicable, that make us doubt what we believe is possible. I've told you before, no matter how much we try to be skeptical, there will always be things that we simply cannot ignore. So turn off the light, prepare yourself, and let yourself be carried away. Because there's no turning back. Because you are already entering the following tales of the night. Hello, Uriel. I've been listening to you for years, but only now do I dare to write to you to tell you about something that happened to me in 2020, in the first months of the pandemic. It's not a terrifying story, like others that have been told to you, but it left me with a horrible feeling. To this day, I still don't understand what the hell happened. At that time, like everyone else, I spent almost all day at home. My friends and I would gather on video calls at night to make quarantine less heavy. They were long calls of several hours, sometimes literally just with the camera on, while each of us did our own things. I don't know if it sounds very strange to you, or if there's anyone else out there who's done something similar, but we felt accompanied, close. I almost always connected from the computer in my room, but that night the battery was about to die. Since I didn't want to plug it in, I left it there, while I went to the kitchen to prepare something to eat. However, I felt like I was missing the conversation, so I connected from my cell phone and rested it on the table, watching the screen, listening to my friends while I prepared my dinner. That time in the call, there were only my friend Erica, my friend Horacio, and me. Erica left for a moment because she got a call from her mom, and Horacio, who had a lot of homework, took the opportunity to go make himself some coffee. I was left alone on the video call, looking at the screen without much interest. At that moment, Erica's and Horacio's cameras were still on, showing their empty rooms. It was then that I noticed something strange in Erica's. At first I didn't know what it was, but something felt out of place. As if it vibrated, as if the image was about to move. I stared at her room on the screen. There was a shadow in the doorframe. It wasn't Erica. It looked like a person standing, barely visible in the darkness. I moved closer to the screen trying to see better. The figure didn't move. It was just there, as if it were observing the call. I was about to write to Erica when, suddenly, on the cell phone screen, something else caught my attention, something in my own room. My computer camera was still on, transmitting in the video call, and in the image of my room, in the darkest corner, next to my desk, there was a face, barely visible. But it was there, an elongated, pale face with eyes sunken in deep dark circles and wide open, as if it were looking directly at the camera. I dropped the phone. My room was empty. My house was empty. It had to be. It took me a few seconds to react, to force myself to get up and walk over there. The door was open, as I had left it. I peeked in with my heart beating strongly. There was no one. The computer was still on. I approached slowly and looked at the screen. The video call was still active, but the image of my room was still there, and in the corner of the screen, right where I had seen the face, it was still there, but now the figure seemed to be deeper in the darkness, further from the camera behind me. I closed the computer immediately. I stayed in the living room for the rest of the night. I don't know what I saw on that occasion. I don't know if what first appeared in Erica's house somehow then appeared in my room. But since then, I've never left a video call open when I was alone, for fear that something might happen there. And also since then, I have the doubt. Community. Do you think that, as they did before through the telephone, now there are energies that can travel, transport themselves from one place to another, through the internet signal? The only thing that keeps me calm is that, since then, I've never had any strange experience, nor have I heard anything out of the ordinary again. This story was told to me by my father, and he always said that one day he would take me to the place and show me the house. And he was serious. He never changed a single detail when he told me, and every time he mentioned that night, he did it with the same seriousness. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to take me. My father, Tomás Alberto Gutiérrez Álvarez, was a taxi driver for most of his life. And when money was scarce, which was very often, he would work up to 20 hours straight. Sometimes he would come home just to eat something quickly and then leave again, even though my mother complained that he couldn't spend his life in the taxi. But he said there was no other way, and my mother worked too. That night, past midnight, he was coming back after a long trip he had made from the city center, so long that he decided that for that night it was enough. He was so tired that he felt his eyes heavy and his back numb, and the only thing he could think of was to get home to sleep. But when he passed by the entrance to the municipal cemetery, he saw a silhouette raising its hand. At first he didn't even think of anything other than the fare. It was his custom. Whenever someone hailed him and didn't seem like a problem, he would stop without thinking. What the man asked him seemed normal, to take him to an address nearby, which was actually on the way to his house. So he accepted without hesitation, although he had barely looked at him. As they drove, he began to notice something strange. The passenger had a strange smell. It wasn't alcohol or cigarettes, like many of the passengers he carried at those hours. He smelled of wet earth, a strong, penetrating smell, like when you dig in a field after the rain. And not only that, he looked dirty, too dirty. He hadn't noticed well at first, but as he looked at him out of the corner of his eye in the mirror, he realized that the man seemed more and more covered in dirt with each passing minute, as if he had rolled in the ground before getting in. My father began to feel uncomfortable. At first he thought it was fatigue, that he had been driving for too many hours, and his mind was already playing tricks on him. But the smell was still there, and the feeling that something wasn't right wouldn't leave him at peace. The man didn't say a word the entire way. When they arrived, my father stopped in front of the house. It was old, with the windows closed and the walls full of moisture, with grass creeping through the cracks. Not a single light was on. The passenger got out unhurriedly and began walking to the door. My father waited for him to enter so he could leave at once. He didn't care that he hadn't paid, but then, suddenly, the man stopped abruptly and turned around.
Wait, don't leave.
My father didn't like how that sounded. He watched him enter the house. A few seconds passed and the silence was so deep that it made him doubt if he was still awake. There were no lights, no noise, nothing. Just the cold breeze of the early morning and the feeling that something was wrong. A moment later, the man came out with a bill in his hand.
Keep the change,
he said, handing it over. My father took the money without even looking and nodded, just wanting to get out of there as soon as possible. He saw the man enter the house again as he drove away, but there was something about the way he walked that made his blood run cold. He moved slowly, rigidly, as if his joints weren't working properly, as if his body had no life. The entire way back, he couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. He tried to convince himself that he was just a strange guy, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The bill was old, yellowish, but valid, which was what mattered. When he arrived, my father sat at the table, looking at it. He didn't know what to do with it. He didn't know if he should spend it or if he should simply keep it with him as proof that what he had experienced that night was real. He only knew that he never wanted to pass by that place again. He told us that story many times, always with the same certainty that what had gotten into his taxi that night wasn't an ordinary passenger. He never changed a single detail of his story. His great regret was having to spend that bill, but he said that when money was tight, one couldn't afford the luxury of having a lucky bill. My father and I always postponed that trip for later, taking me to that house, showing me that place. Unfortunately, he never got to do it. But I want to leave this story here. Community. Share it with you. Let it stay in Tales of the Night forever. So that in this memory, in the minds of each and every one of you, my father continues to live.
No se trata de tener suficientes papitas de McDonald's. Se trata de tener suficiente ketchup para asegurarte que cada papita tenga un turno. A menos que te atrevas a comer las papitas sin ketchup. Psst, te prometo que igual te seguirán encantando. Para pa pa pa.
Community, thank you for reaching the middle of this episode. As I always tell you, not many people finish an episode of Tales of the Night. I don't know if it's out of fear. I don't know if they fall asleep. But whatever the case, you are part of a very important group, a VIP group. And if you want to be more so, you already know. Subscribe to this channel, to this podcast. Subscribe wherever you're listening to us. Leave us a thumbs up or a 5-star rating because it helps us a lot to keep growing. We continue with more stories tonight. Hello, Uriel. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be able to greet you, and to be able to greet the entire community. I hope you can read my story as I've wanted to tell it to you for a long time. I've listened to each of your stories for more than 2 years, and I'm very excited to finally be able to share my story with you. You see, it all begins when I was still very young. I have no memories of this. I know it from what my family tells. According to them, I had an imaginary friend, a boy whom I called the Blue Boy, and with whom I chatted nonstop for hours. At first, everyone thought it was typical of children my age. But over time, I realized that perhaps the Blue Boy wasn't just in my imagination. Many times, my mom would get scared seeing me talk to myself, so she'd let me go to a neighbor's house to play. The curious thing is that when I went to her house, I also saw a boy. Only this one I called Precious. For me, it was the most normal thing in the world. At that time, we lived in my grandparents' house. My grandfather, may he rest in peace, always told us that every time he went to the bathroom in the early morning, he would see a boy sitting on a couch that was at the end of a long, dark corridor. Then my grandmother told my mother that loneliness could bring bad things. I should clarify that I was the first daughter, granddaughter, and niece in the family, so that's the loneliness they were referring to. But shortly after, my brother was born, and when he arrived, everything calmed down a bit. Then at 40 days, my first cousin was born, and over time we became 9 grandchildren. Strange things continued to happen, but now they were details that we took as insignificant. The television would turn off by itself. The volume of the music would decrease without explanation, things without importance until, finally, something more serious occurred. One morning my aunt, the youngest, woke up with a terrible headache and an unbearable itching. When they checked what was happening to her, they discovered that she had a small braid in the lower part of her hair. The strangest thing of all isn't that she had it without anyone having done it. The strangest thing is that they couldn't undo it. When they finally managed to loosen it, the hair remained completely stiff, as if it were burned. They tried washing it with everything, even with holy water, but nothing worked. In the end, the only solution was to cut it. My grandmother, who was always very religious, but also a believer in the paranormal, had us place crucifixes on all the doors. However, at night, these would break and fall to the floor. Every time a priest came to bless the house, the events would stop for a while. But they always returned. Years passed like this, until my father bought a house right across from my grandparents. And there my nightmare began. I had a recurring dream in which something was chasing me, and when it was about to catch me, I would pray the Our Father in Latin. The strangest thing is that I don't speak Latin, nor do I know that prayer in that language, but in my dream I always said it perfectly. Only then would I manage to free myself from that which wanted to take my soul. Only then would I wake up with the deepest fear I've ever felt in my life. I spent about a year like this, dreaming the same thing every day. Before going to sleep, I would pray and ask God not to have nightmares that night, but the fear simply wouldn't disappear. At 14 years old, I was still terrified to sleep alone. In that house, community, I saw the boy again. But this time I wasn't the only one seeing him. Now, we could all see the blue boy. Every time we were at the table, the boy would sit down. Every time we were at the table, we could see him out there, through the reflection in the window, sitting on a bench. We also heard how he would run from one end to the other on the floor above, and always those steps would end in my room. At that time I didn't have pets. However, on one of the walls in the upper part, a very strong smell appeared like cat urine. But even if it had been a cat, how would it urinate high up on the wall? My maternal grandmother, who had other beliefs, came one day, prayed for me, and anointed oil on the walls. At least that worked. The smell disappeared. For a moment I thought that everything ended there. But no. The dreams continued. They weren't daily anymore. But they continued until I met my now husband, Hector. Perhaps due to the excitement of falling in love, or for some other reason. For a few months, I forgot about everything, and just when that subject was no longer on my mind, something happened that made me remember. One night, Hector and I were watching movies in my room. On a table, I had a jewelry box with some rings, and suddenly, one of them flew across the room. Just one, my favorite ring. Hector was very frightened, and with good reason. We both saw how the ring rose and then fell violently to the floor. It wasn't as if it had fallen, as if it had rolled. It rose and then fell, still with fear. Even after seeing that, he decided to stay with me until late. When it was time for him to leave, I accompanied him to the door and returned to my room, still trying to convince myself that there was surely a logical explanation that I still couldn't find. I stayed watching television while waiting for him to let me know that he had arrived safely home. I wasn't sleepy, but suddenly I felt my body heavy and fell asleep. When I tried to wake up to turn off the television, I couldn't move. And upon raising my gaze, there he was, not moving, staring at me from my desk chair. The boy. The blue boy. When I managed to regain movement, the only thing I could do was run out to my brother's room. He, half asleep, still tried to calm me down, until we heard a crash in my room. When we went there, we saw the chair thrown to the other end of the room. And there, yes, fear invaded both of us, so much that it made us cry. He was 16 years old, and I was 20. We weren't children. But there we were, crying out of fear in the middle of the night. It wasn't long before we moved from my town to the city. I lived with my parents for about 6 months, until Hector and I rented a small apartment. It was tiny, but the energy was heavy. If you were in the living room, you felt like you were being watched. Sometimes I was in the room, and I would see Hector peeking through the door, but he had never gotten up from the sofa. He would tell me that he had heard me call him, at times when I was asleep. And so, enduring that, another year passed, until my son arrived, until Camila arrived. I became pregnant in October 2022. As there were now 4 of us, counting our dog, we needed a bigger place. We found a beautiful little house, and with everything ready for the move, we spent our last night in the apartment, and it was that night when I saw him for the last time. I remember that I was asleep, but I turned to hug Hector. I didn't feel him, so I woke up, and there I saw it. A shadow sitting next to me. I saw how it slowly turned its head to look at me. Its face began to disfigure, as if it were melting, as if it were burning, although I couldn't see fire. My only reaction was to hide under the sheets until morning. The next day I asked Hector if he had gotten up in the night, but he told me that he had been there the whole time, by my side. That, community, was the last time I saw him, and you don't know how grateful I am for that. A greeting to everyone, and thank you very much for reading me, and a special greeting to Javier Panda, a great friend of my husband's, who I know is also a big fan of Tales of the Night. Rest well. Have a very good night. Good evening, community. I've been listening to Tales of the Night with my daughter for a long time. We started when she was just 10 years old, and now that she's 13, we still enjoy it together. We've always talked about the stories that are told here, and for a long time I've been thinking about sharing one of those that have most marked my family. I finally decided to do it. This story happened to my grandmother. We are from Peru, from one of the oldest areas of Lima. Before everything was urbanized, when instead of streets and avenues there were only farms and factories, stories of apparitions and paranormal events were common. At that time, my grandmother lived alone, but every night after work she would stop by to visit my great-grandmother. It was a habit that she never broke, despite the fact that in those years there was no public lighting, and the streets were completely dark at nightfall. The only light came from some candles lit in the windows of the houses. My grandmother used to say that starting at 6 in the afternoon, a man would tour the area with a lamp, illuminating his path. That's why she never stayed until very late. She knew that when he passed by, it meant it was time to go, but one afternoon she got distracted more than usual. Night fell. When she saw him pass, she realized the time. She hurried to say goodbye. However, her mother stood looking at her in silence. There was something strange in her expression, something that made her stop. Stay tonight. Don't go. Don't go out. My grandmother, surprised, asked her mother why. She told her that something wasn't right, and she, smiling, told her that she was just exaggerating. If you go, whatever you hear, don't answer, don't turn around. But Mom, my grandmother replied, don't turn around, I'm telling you, go straight home, and as soon as you arrive, close the door. For the first time, my grandmother felt a chill running down her spine. But then she made fun of herself, thinking she was falling for her mother's superstitions, and as soon as she set foot on the street, she knew she had been wrong. The night was much darker than normal. There was a different kind of cold, a sensation of emptiness. The first thing she noticed was that on the corner, the store that was always open until late was closed this time. There was no one on the street. She couldn't hear the sound of crickets or the murmur of people in the houses. The silence was absolute. She quickened her pace. She didn't want to stay there any longer. When she reached the park she had to cross to take the avenue towards her house, she noticed something else. In the center of it there were some iron swings. And next to them, in the darkness, a motionless figure could be distinguished. It was a woman, or so it seemed. She couldn't tell if she was short or if she was crouching. All she could see was her rigid silhouette and her inclined head. My grandmother felt a knot in her stomach, but she looked away and kept walking. Then something hit her leg. She startled and looked at the ground. It was a stone. She immediately looked up, expecting to see someone, but there was no one else on the street. No one except that motionless figure next to the swings that was still there, that hadn't moved an inch. My grandmother felt a chill. She accelerated her pace, wanting to leave the park as soon as possible. And it was then that she heard the voice in a dry, raspy whisper, with a trembling tone like that of an old woman. But what terrified her most wasn't the sound itself, but what it said to her.
Didn't I tell you not to look?
Fear pierced her chest. For an instant, she thought she had imagined the voice, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But the certainty that she wasn't alone made her stop. Her breathing became heavy, and without being able to avoid it, she turned her head. The silhouette was no longer there. The swings. The silhouette was a few meters in front of her. It was a woman dressed completely in black, with long, messy hair covering part of her face. The most disturbing thing was her extremely pale skin. The rigid way in which she held herself as if there was no life in her at all. The woman tilted her head as if studying her, and then, with a wide and unnatural smile, began to speak with the same raspy voice.
Didn't I tell you not to turn around?
And then she smiled. It was too much. My grandmother felt the whole world closing in around her, that the darkness seemed to be devouring her, and the last thing she felt was the cold ground hitting her body. When she woke up, she was at her mother's house. She didn't remember how she had gotten there, but some neighbors had found her unconscious at the entrance of the street and took her to her house. My great-grandmother was waiting for her, sitting by her side without saying anything. When my grandmother was able to speak, she told her between sobs what she had seen. Her mother listened in silence, and when she finished, she simply sighed. I told you. You ran into her. But you were lucky. They never spoke of the subject again. But after that night, my grandmother never walked alone after dark again.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.